Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be sewing. We're going to be sewing along with my new winter Know Me pattern. The pattern number is Know Me ME2143. I love this dress. I'm so excited about it. This dress is a knit dress. It features a little off the shoulder number, twist front detail along the skirt, and I just love it. If you have a holiday gathering or event coming up, this dress would be perfect for it. I made it in a velvet and I wore it to the Marine Corps birthday ball this year. Or if you have a date night coming up, it can also be dressed down in a nice casual knit with some boots. So I love, 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 love this dress. For size reference, I made the size 16 on the pattern cover envelope. I'm going to be making the size 18 in the tutorial. For fabric, I'm going to be using a double knit for the video, but if you have a jersey knit, a rib knit, or a stretch velvet at home, those fabrics will be perfect for this dress. Go ahead and cut out all your pattern pieces, transfer your markings, and let's get started sewing. The first thing that we're going to do is with right side spacing, we're going to lay our front and our back bodice pieces. I put some marks here on the wrong side just so I can indicate the right from wrong. If you have fabric that's similar, you may want to do the same thing, or you can even put a little sticker or something just so you know the right from wrong. With right side spacing, we're going to go ahead and pin our shoulder seams here together. So let's grab some pins, match up your notch, and pin in place. And so now we can go to the sewing machine and we are going to baste our shoulders edges together. So go ahead and lengthen out your stitch from the default 2.5 and lengthen it out to a 5.0 or whatever number your machine goes up to. Mine goes up to a 5.0, the stitch length. That is your basting stitch. So let's go ahead and do that for both of our shoulder seams now. Okay, now that we have it basted, as you can see here, I've gone ahead and basted my seam. The next thing we're going to do is right here between our notches or our marks here, the circles that we transferred, we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches. So you're going to do the same thing to this side as well. Let's go ahead and do our gathering stitches now. All right, now that we have our gathers on our shoulder seams like so, the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and grab pattern piece number 3. This right here is a guide for the gathers. For this, you need either some twill tape or you can either use clear elastic if you have that. I have some twill tape here that I have left over in my stash, and I have transferred the dots from the pattern. It's 2 dots onto the twill tape. And so now that you have that, we are going to place them at our dots that we transferred and then pull up our gathers so that it matches right there with the dots. Before we pin it though, you do want to make sure that you have the twill tape on the front, the wrong side of the front. So I transferred a 1 right here. So this is the front. And I'm pinning right along the seam line because we're going to stitch through the middle of the tape right along the seam line. And so now I'm going to take my gathering stitches and I'm going to pull so that it gathers up and it becomes the same width as the tape here. Okay, get it in there as close as possible. I'm using a thicker knit, so I am probably going to be a little bit off from my dot. If you are, just get it as close as you can if you're not using a lightweight knit. You can add another pin if you'd like. And again, when we go back to the sewing machine to stitch, you want to stitch right through the center of your twill tape. Okay, once you have it pinned, now we can go to the sewing machine and we can stitch. We're going to stitch down the whole seam because we only did a basting stitch here. So using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch down. Make sure that you stitch right between the center of the tape. Go ahead and do that for both sides. And then if you're going to be finishing off your seam, you can finish off your seam allowance with your serger, or you can stitch again using a double stitch. For a double stitch, you will stitch following along with your basting stitch, and then you will come over about 1/8 of an inch inside the seam allowance and then do another stitch. I'll be using a double stitch for this sew along and then finishing off the raw edges with pinking shears. Let's go ahead and stitch our shoulder seams now. All right, now that you have your Shoulder seams sewn, they should look similar to this. You may have yours finished off with your serger. Again, I finished mine off with my pinking shears. Also did 2 double stitches here, so 2 stitches, and then finished off the edges and pressed the seam going toward the back. This is what it looks like from the right side. You should have a little cluster of gathers on this shoulder seam, and you should have a little bit more of a cluster on the other shoulder seam. And so now with the right sides together, we're going to grab pattern piece number 4. You should have transferred a circle as well as a notch. The circle matches up to the shoulder seam, so we are going to match that up and then again match the notch. I'm going to pin at the circle and the notch and then pin the rest of the way. Once you have it pinned, we can pin the other side the same way, and then we can stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to do the same double stitch on mine, but if you have a serger, you can stitch and then use your serge for the second stitch. I'm not using my serger for this project because I don't have the same color thread or any color thread that's similar to this. So I'm just doing a double stitch and then finishing off my seams with my pinking shears. Let's go ahead and stitch it now. Again, pin the other side the same exact way, and then let's go ahead and stitch. Okay, once you have it sewn and you have finished off the raw edge, you can go ahead and press your seam going down toward the hem of the sleeve. Now that you have pressed your seam going down toward the sleeve hem, now we're going to lay the bodice right sides facing, and we are going to pin and stitch the underarm seam here. Once you have it pinned, you can pin the other underarm seam the same exact way, and then we're going to stitch it using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, you can do a double stitch or you can do a serge to finish off your raw edges. Let's go ahead and stitch both sides now. Once you have your underarm seams sewn, you can go ahead and finish them off, and you can give them a press. I'm just going to press my seams going toward the back since I am doing a double stitch. So I'm just going to press all my seams going toward the back. And now I can go ahead and flip everything right sides out. When you are stitching your seams here, make sure that you try to get them as close as possible like I've done here. And next we can move on to inserting the elastic around the neckline. For the neckline, we need to grab some elastic as well as pattern piece number 5. Pattern piece number 5, this is the elastic guide for the neck. And I have my 1/4 of an inch elastic here. I've already cut it out. And I'm cut it out according to the size that I cut. I cut the 18, so I just have it on the 18. I just laid it over. I did not stretch the elastic. I just laid it flat. And I transferred this dot right here that's on the pattern. I transferred it onto my elastic. And I also marked out 5/8 of an inch on the ends of the elastic on both of them, because we're going to overlap them like so. Just overlap, and we're going to stitch and secure them in place. Now that we have our elastic secured, now we can go ahead and place it around the neckline of the dress. You do want to make sure that you don't twist your elastic while you are sewing it. We're going to match the stitching here where we secured the elastic to the left shoulder seam, and the dot, we're going to match that to the right shoulder seam. If it gets a little confusing, you can take a look at the pattern envelope. The left shoulder is all the way up. The right shoulder is where it's off the shoulder. So just keep that in mind. So for the left, you want to put where you secure the elastic, and the right shoulder will have the dot. And we're just going to place this along the inside here, and you want it to be 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, as best as I can. And then for the dot, make sure nothing twisted. Make sure you have your dot right on that shoulder seam on the right side. Pin that in place. Now, a couple things you can do. You can go to the sewing machine and you can do a 3/8 of an inch basting stitch if that's what you would like. Or once you get to the machine, you can line it up there. But you need the outer edge, this edge here of the elastic, to be right on the 3/8 of an inch seam line. So the outer edge here this edge that's closer to the raw edge, it needs to be lined up with the 3/8 of an inch seam line. So again, you can do a basting stitch with 3/8 of an inch. That way you know you have it right on the edge, or when you get to your machine, you can just adjust it and make sure that you have the outer edge of your elastic right along the 3/8 of an inch seam line. And then you can begin stitching. You're going to stitch down the center of the elastic, stretching slightly to get it to fit. Let's go ahead and stitch it now. Okay, so I have my elastic sewn on, and as you can see here, I opted to do a basting stitch right along the 3/8 of an inch seam line, and then I went ahead and stitched down the center of the elastic. So this is what mine look like here. Again, I did the basting stitch right on the 3/8 of an inch seam line so that I could have the outer edge of the elastic right along that line, and then I stitched down the center of the elastic. So next we are going to fold the raw edge to the inner edge of the elastic. So just fold it over like so, and then we're going to fold again to the inside. So we're going to do 2 folds. So we're going to fold over 1/4 of an inch and then fold again. And then you just want to stitch really close to this inner fold. You want to try not to catch in your elastic. It's going to be really close though, but just make sure that you fold it over and then fold again, and then try not to catch in your elastic as you stitch it in place. Okay, after you have your neckline sewn, it should look similar to this. And this is the inside. And now we can move on to the next step, and that is to do a narrow hem on our sleeve hem here. So for the narrow hem, you want to press up 5/8 of an inch. You can give that a press. Open out the press, fold in the raw edge to the crease, and then fold it back to the original 5/8 of an inch seam line. So it's like 2 folds. Okay, as you can see, I have pressed up my 5/8 of an inch hem allowance. I'll just pull it out so you can see that crease right here. I'm going to fold the raw edge to that crease and then fold it over again. And then we'll be able to stitch close to this inner fold here. Let's go ahead and stitch our hem in place now. Okay, after you have your hem on your sleeve sewn, you do want to give this a press. This is what mine look like here along the inside. And I did use a narrow zigzag stitch right here along the sleeve hem. So go ahead and give it a final press, and then we can put the bodice to the side and start to work on the skirt. Okay, next we're going to start working on pattern piece number 6 and 7. The first thing that we're going to do on both of them, you should have transferred some dots. As you can see, I marked mine here. You have the same dots on pattern piece number 7 as well. They're just in a different placement. And so what we're going to do is we can go ahead to the sewing machine, and we're going to reinforce these dots by just stitching right through the stitching line. So I'm just going to start stitching and stitch right through the stitching line on all of the dots. Once we have them reinforced, then we're going to clip to the dot, being careful not to clip through the stitching line. So let's go ahead and do a stitching line right along the seam line through the dots. And we don't need to start all the way up here. It's just right past it, maybe a 1/2 inch past it, stitch through it, and then stop a 1/2 inch past the last dot. Let's go ahead and do our reinforced stitch now for all of the dots on pattern piece number 6 and 7. Okay, now that we have them reinforced, they should look similar to this. On this one right here, you do want to make sure that you come around once you get to the dot, pivot and stitch down. Like I've done here, I started here, I came up to the dot, and then I pivot. Originally, I did keep straight, but I realized I had to come on this side to make sure I reinforced it as well. And so this is what the other side looks like here. Go ahead and reinforce your dots, and then once you have them reinforced, I'm going to clip away some of the loose threads. And then you want to clip to the dots, being sure not to clip through them. Do that for all of the dots. Now once you have them clipped, we're going to go ahead and form a narrow hem with the portion of the fabric that's in between the dots. Press this toward the inside, so toward the wrong side of the fabric, press that in. And then once it's pressed, you're going to fold in the raw edge, press that, and then we're going to stitch really close to the inner fold. Again, the same exact way that we did for the neckline and for the sleeve. We're just creating a narrow hem with the portion of the fabric that's in between the dots that we clipped. Let's go ahead and do that for all of the clipped areas now. Okay, I just pressed these and I just wanted to show you. So this is what that will look like once you have it folded toward the inside and you have folded in the raw edge. Now we can stitch close to this inner fold. All right, now that we have all of our narrow hems complete, now we can lay our pattern pieces right sides facing like so. And over here on the side where you have where the twist pieces are, you should have a notch that you transferred. We're going to pin here at the notch, and I'm going to stop pinning at the dot because I'm doing view B with the slit. If you are not doing view B, then you would just pin down the entire seam. You can finish it off with your serger or a double stitch and then press it toward the back. Because I have a notch or a circle, I'm going to stop pinning here. So pin at the notch, and I'm going to match this up here. I'm going to pin right at my circle. And I'm going to continue pinning the seam. And we're going to pin right here at those circles where we clipped that, match those up, and pin. Okay, now we can go ahead and stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then once you have that done, you can do a double stitch, or you can finish off your seam with your serger. Let's go ahead and stitch this now. All right, after you have your seam sewn like I've done here, and again, I did a double stitch. You may have just used your serger, but at the end of the stitching right here at the dot, you do want to clip, being sure not to clip through your stitching like so. So right at the dot, go ahead and place a clip, and I'm actually going to finish off the raw edge with my pinking shears above the clip. All right, now that you have your seam finished, we can move to the next step. All right, next let's go ahead and open up the skirt. And we're going to take pattern piece number 7. Pattern piece number 7 has the double, triple notches here on the side. So that's one way to indicate which is which. So look for the one that has those triple notches. And we're just going to move this pattern piece number 6 out of the way. And so up here along the top, you want to take this portion of it and fold it over, match up that notch, and then we're going to pin in place. We're going to stitch from the edge to those small circles where we clipped that. So you can go ahead and pin that here. You will be creating a little loop, a little circle right here. So go ahead and match that up. First, I'm going to match up the notch and pin there. And again, match up those circles where we did the reinforcing in the clip. Match that up and pin. Once you have a pin, let's go ahead and stitch again from the edge to the circle using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your seam sewn, it should look similar to this. Again, your seam may look different if you're not doing a double stitch. You may just have your 5/8 of an inch stitch, and then you may have just finished it off with your serger. That's perfectly fine. Now you want to just go ahead and press your seam going up. So we can open this out and just press your seam going up toward the top of the skirt. Okay, now that we have our loop created, the loop is right here that we just stitched, and you have pressed your seam going up. Now we're going to take pattern piece number 6, this portion here, and we are going to take this in and put it through the loop. So we're going to bring it in, pull it up through the loop here. So once you have it through, it should look similar to this. You do want to make sure that it's not twisted, that you still have the right sides facing. So this is what it should look like once you have it pulled through. And so now you'll see that you have a single notch here and a single notch here. On the other side, you will have 2 single notches. We are not going to pin this side. This matches up to the bodice. So find the single notch and the single notch, and we are going to fold it over, right sides facing, and pin that in place. Pin the edge. And then come here toward the center where the loop and everything is. And you want to find the start where those small circles are, and then match those up. All right, once you have it pinned, it should look similar to this. Let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have our seam sewn, we can go ahead and give it a press going up toward the skirt. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, your skirt should look similar to this at this point. The last thing that we need to stitch on the skirt to finish forming out our twist would be the side edge of our extension. And this here is a double notch, so you should have transferred a double notch here. So I'm just want to show that again. So they're somewhat toward the inside here. We need to stitch these seams here together. So with right sides facing, you want to match up these double notches and pin in place, pin the edge, and then again come down here and find that circle where we reinforced and clipped at, match that up. Once you have this pinned, go ahead and stitch it in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do a double stitch if that's what you're doing, or you can just finish off your seam with your serger. All right, now that we have this seam sewn here, you can go ahead and give that a press as well. And this is what the skirt should look like at this point. And so now we can go ahead and grab pattern piece number 8, that is the left skirt back. And so now with right sides facing, you want to grab pattern piece number 8. You want to match up your triple notches here along the side and pin that in place. All right, now that you have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, after you have that seam sewn, you want to go ahead and finish off your edges. And then next you want to take the remaining seam here and pin it to the other seam, matching up that single notch. So go ahead and pin this to the remaining seam, match up the single notch, and pin it in place. And then we're going to stitch it the same exact way, and then you can finish off your seam. All right, once you have it pinned, go ahead and stitch and then finish off your seams. All right, now that you have both of the seams sewn, we can go ahead and flip the skirt right sides out. And with right sides facing, you're going to match up your bodice to your skirt. Make sure that you have the front of your bodice going to the front of the skirt. So I'm just gonna flip that over and pull it through so that the right sides are facing. And you want to find your side seams as well as those double notches. And we are going to pin. And match up your side seam here. Once you have it all pinned, you can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then after you have that stitch, we're going to stitch again 3/8 of an inch away from the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Inside the seam allowance still, we want to create a casing. So you're going to stitch again. Make sure that you leave an opening though, so that we'll be able to insert the elastic. So first stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then 3/8 of an inch away from that stitch, stitch again, leaving an opening so that we can insert the elastic. Let's go ahead and stitch that now. Once you have your casing sewn, it should look similar to this, and you can see here, this is where I left an opening. Let me trim away some of these threads. This is where I left an opening right here on that second stitch. So you can see I did my first stitch and then I went over about 3/8 of an inch, and then I did again, leaving an opening for the elastic. Now the elastic for the waist is 3/8 of an inch. So go ahead and get that. It's a little tight. 3/8 of an inch is ideal, and that is what is recommended. But if you don't think you're going to be able to get it through, maybe you didn't do it wide enough, you can go with a smaller elastic. And that's actually what I'm going to have to do, because I can see I didn't go over quite the right amount in some spaces. But again, make sure that you go over far enough so that you'll be able to get your 3/8 of an inch wide elastic through there. For the elastic guide, you want to grab pattern piece number 9. This is the elastic guide for the waist. And just like we did for the neckline, you just want to get your elastic and measure it out according to the size that you cut for the dress. And cut there. I'm actually going to wrap it around me just to make sure I'm happy with that. Okay, that's going to be good. And so grabbing a safety pin, I'm just going to put it to one end here. And I'm just going to put it through the opening and start to pull the elastic through. I'm going to insert it now and just start to feed the elastic into the waistband casing like so. All right, once you get it all through, you do want to make sure that your elastic has not twisted, and just finish bringing it out. You can secure the ends and try your dress on to make sure that you are happy before you secure it. But once you are ready to go, you can just go ahead and grab the ends. Again, make sure that they are not twisted, and lap them over. And then you want to secure the elastic. Once you have that secured, you can go ahead and close up the opening and finish off the raw edge. Okay, after you have stitched it and you have closed up the opening, you can go ahead and finish off your raw edge. As you can see here, I finished mine off with my serger, and then just distribute the elastic evenly. If you have loose threads, go ahead and trim those off. And now we have our elastic casing formed. So your waist should look similar to this now. The last thing for us to do is our hem. Now, if you were doing view A and you don't have a slit, then you would just do a 5/8 of an inch narrow hem all the way around your skirt. You can either fold up 5/8 of an inch and then just stitch close to the edge, or you can fold it up, open it out, press in the raw edge, and then fold it over again, the same way that we did in other areas of this dress. So those are your two options for doing your narrow hem if you're doing view A. If you have the slit like I have, we are going to press under 5/8 of an inch along the seam allowance along the slit, and then we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the pressed edge. So again, if you have the slit, press it in 5/8 of an inch, and then 1/4 of an inch away from the pressed edge, we're going to do 1/4 of an inch stitch. And then once you get to the top, you would just stitch, pivot across to square it, and then come down the other side, doing the same 1/4 of an inch stitch from the pressed edge. So first you're going to do that, and then you will fold up your hem allowance on the bottom of the skirt and do a 5/8 of an inch narrow hem. Let's go ahead and do those stitches to finish off our hem now. Okay, I have the front slit opening stitched. So this is what that looks like here. And I've gone ahead and pressed up my narrow hem. So I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to fold in the raw edge and fold over right along my 5/8 of an inch where I pressed. And then I'm going to stitch close to the inner fold. After you have your hem sewn, it should look similar to this. You want to go ahead and give everything one final press. And once you have it pressed, you are all done with view B on Know Me ME2143. Well, that is all for the video, and I really do hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you do not miss the next video from me, and I will see you then. Blessings, everyone. Bye.